Last year, our Christmas guest was Riek Bakker.
Oh, yes.
So you're on the equal level of Riek.
Just so you know. Bad.
Welkom bij de Toren van Babel. De maandelijkse serie binnen de Architectenweb podcast waarin we praten over hoogbouw. Mijn naam is Daan Roggeveen, ik ben de founder van Maar Architecture. Ik heb 10 jaar in Shanghai gewoond, waar ik gefascineerd ben geraakt door hoogbouw. In deze serie praat ik met ontwerpers, ontwikkelaars en andere experts die allemaal hun eigen perspectief hebben op hoogbouw. Samen gaan we op zoek naar het antwoord op de vraag: hoe maak je nu een echt goed hoog gebouw? Ik zit vandaag in ons kantoor aan de Lauriergracht in Amsterdam, waar ik een interview heb met de architect Don Murphy, founder van VMX Architects en supervisor in onder meer Amstel 3 en Eindhoven. Met Don praat ik over het superviseren van hoogbouw en zijn recente aanstelling als supervisor in Eindhoven. Maar we hebben het ook over zijn komst naar Nederland en over de start van VMX. We praten over het diverse portfolio van het bureau en zijn uitgebreide ervaring als supervisor. En we hebben het over de noodzaak van verdichting en natuurinclusief bouwen. Welkom Don.
Thank you, Dan.
Spreek je nou echt helemaal geen Nederlands?
Nee.
Oké, nou, dan gaan we het gewoon in het Engels. Wat doe je in het Engels? So you came to Amsterdam in the 90s, early 90s, I guess, no? And what was the reason? Why did you move here?
So as a student of architecture in London, we used to look to the Netherlands for inspiration, very much to look at the humanist tradition and what happened with Team 10. And I was fascinated by the Netherlands, not particularly about the architecture, but more about the urban planning. And then Herman Hertzberger came to London to give a lecture. I was at that lecture, and he spoke about opening up a special school called the Berlag Institute, a kind of postmaster school.
Yes.
I was determined to get there. I was the first year student,
oh, really?
One of the first 16 students ever to be there. So a pioneer. And I planned to stay for 2 years for the course.
Yeah.
I still have the Verhuisdozen. And somehow life just continued and I stayed.
Yeah, cool. And then Berlage was still in Amsterdam, I guess.
Yeah, where Berlage was, they were planned to move into the Bergweeshuis by Alder van Eyck. We were first in a temporary location on the Van Diemenstraat for the first semester. And then we moved to Amsterdam-Zuid.
Yeah.
To the Alder van Eyck building.
Yeah, yeah. And Hersberger was the dean there.
Yeah. And Alder van Eyck was renovating. And there were all the most amazing architects came
to teach
there. You had, well, of course, Alder van Eyck was coming in and out. You had a guy called Theo Bosch. You had that school. Then you also had people like Zaha Hadid. You had Tado Ando. You had Villorette, who was a young guy then, a young dog. Then you had Nouvelle was there. They were all very interesting people, actually. And what was fascinating was not what they taught you, but just observing these amazing people. The first time you heard them speak, you were like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then they would come back, and you'd see them a few weeks later or months later, and they had more or less the same story. And then you realized everybody has one story, or most people.
That's fascinating.
90% of people have one story. And because they were taking us seriously, you start taking yourself seriously. So these were more life lessons as much as anything else about taking yourself seriously and, having that story, I suppose.
Yes. Well, we'll get back to that later because there was one, in the preparation of the interview, there was many things that stuck with me. What was the vibe like in the school at that time? Because you described it was a small school, high-profile visitors.
It was very tense because you had the northern European students, which were very much pursuing this kind of approach of resistance. You had this kind of resistance movement about much more socially engaged. You had much more, and this was also happened in Delft, actually. You had this idea that people were more questioning progress and technology, and then you had the southern or the East Europeans, which were pro change, and much more embracing this commercialization of architecture. And you'd have, there was like Ola Baumann and Roemer van Toorn were talking about this resistance group. And Hertzberger wasn't didn't have a clear answer. He was really just floating between the different camps. And when I came to the Netherlands as a student in London, we were far more politically engaged. And I realized...
In London, you were more politically engaged?
Far more politically engaged. And schools were very political places. Schools of architecture particularly were very political places. And what I discovered in the Netherlands, that the students felt to me apolitical. They were not political. And it was even clear from later when I realized there was that big exhibition before I came called Modernism Zonder Dogma. So I already saw that Dutch students maybe didn't need to be politicized.
But that's fascinating. What was the reason for that? Do you think that there was no political sort of engagement from the Dutch side?
Maybe they felt there was no need for it. That maybe the society was really working quite well.
Yeah, because these were the years of,
these were the Thatcher years.
Yeah. Well,
So I studied during the Thatcher years, and we were all very politically engaged students. And the Dutch students were not not at all actually politically engaged.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because mid-90s you started your office.
Yeah.
And this was also the years which were you could say, in which Holland or the Western Europe had enormous economic growth. So there was a very positive vibe, maybe also an apolitical vibe.
But also, there was a change of guard also taking place in Delft. You also saw Koolhaas was establishing his position there, his approach there. Yeah. You could see that people like Theo Bosch and Aldo van Eyck, more of these types of architects, Abel Kahan, that school, were retreating a bit, I would say, almost. And then you started to really see, eventually, the Super Dutch.
Yes.
When I came here, it was the golden age of urban planning. That was the early 90s, the golden age of it. Then when I was here at the beginning of my office, it was the golden age of architecture.
Yes.
I always say now we're in the golden age of landscape architecture.
Yes, and you also made a plea a couple of years ago for a sort of rejuvenation of engagement with architecture. That architecture should, you call it in an interview in the 2016, you call it like, we should have another debate about what architecture is about.
Well, what I noticed as I went into doing a lot of supervisory work. I saw that that architects were really, this was after the economic crisis of 2008. I think people really felt it in 2010, actually 2011. Yeah. And then you started to see, and then as that recession lasted, what came out of it was a less critically minded architect, a much more dienstverlening, service-orientated architecture. What you saw was there was very much the beleggersproduct as a sort of woning typology. Yeah. And I felt that we needed to support architects and architecture. And I remember very often seeing even architects at presentations to me being a bit vulnerable or nervous or scared of their opdrachtgever. And a whole group of architects who were doing extremely good, interesting work before the crisis had kind of disappeared and still have. They're still not there, actually. They almost became blacklisted. They were too difficult, too awkward, too opinionated.
So let's step 20 years back in time, the moment you started your office, mid-1990s. The name of that office, that's a beautiful story. Because you started, you're the one remaining partner of those three founders. Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened and how you started the office? With what kind of intention?
So I started the office with a fellow student of the Berlage Institute called Reinier de Graaf. He's now a partner at OMA. We started a practice together, and it was called Murphy de Graaf. And we then went on to rent premises from an architect called Ed Veenendaal. We rented an attic space of his. And somehow he was fascinated by what we were doing, and he asked, would we like to join his practice? We said we didn't want to join his practice, but maybe he would like to join our practice. So it became then VMG, Veenendaal Murphy de Graaf. And then Rainier left, so I put an X through his name, so it became VMX. And a year later, Veenendaal left. But then at that point, it was too late to make another
name.
X. So it would be XMX, and then eventually when I leave, it will be XXX, and then we could have Amsterdam Architects, which would be cool.
So that's always a potential sort of future.
But the thing is, at that stage, we already had, after 1 year, we published a book called VMX 95.
Yeah, because it was insanely bold, of course, to start an office and then publish a book immediately.
Yeah.
Why did you do this?
After a year. I had been working for a year. I wanted people to see what we were doing. Yeah. I thought this was a nice way to have a discussion about what we were doing.
Yeah. And what was the book about? What did it show? Just work, or was it also
all projects that we worked on?
But
10
also,
projects, 12
that's
projects.
A reflection, or
there was a critical essay by Roemer van Toorn, and there was another essay by Raphael Gourmets. And what happened was I made a little book. I went to Architecture Natura. I said, would it be possible to put 12 of these books on your shelf?
Yeah.
And maybe people can pay the cost of the book. And then there was the owner at the time, his name was Guus Hemmer, I think. And he looked through it. He said, if you have it properly printed, he said, I'll take 100 or something, or 200. So we found, then we went back to Ed Veenendaal. He was a very wealthy, successful interior architect. And I said to him, every year you give Christmas presents to your clients. Would you like 100 books this year? So he paid for 100 books.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we were able to sell the book. And the book went everywhere. That was the most amazing thing. People in Hong Kong saw it. People in Vancouver saw it. Everywhere people saw the book.
So there was, and this was 95, 96. So the internet was actually barely existing.
This was even earlier. Maybe 95. Sorry, 95, 96. Yeah.
So this pre-internet, so pre-Instagram. Yeah, so you had to get your work out there. Yeah. And you were actually now you were faster than the magazines because you were in your sort of controlling it by yourself.
Yeah. And I remember very successful colleagues saying they looked at this, one of the most important practice at the moment in the Netherlands, and they together, the three of them said, "Where the fuck did these guys come from?" Yeah. And then we.
Was it typical for your generation to do such a thing? I mean, for the vibe that was in the architecture in the Netherlands back then.
It was a part of the discipline was also to communicate and to publish your ideas. Yeah. It was for us, architecture was more than just making buildings. Yeah. And architecture should also be communicated, and you should share these ideas and discuss these ideas. And I think, every month we would look forward to getting the magazine's Archis. Yeah. There were more magazines, periodicals. Yeah. This was every week we would look for magazines. We'd read the stories, the articles. You'd go to lectures. There was a debate. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes I would be upset because I would see very little critics or critical discussions. Sometimes people would just write, but they wouldn't be critical. Yeah. Later I realized, critics don't really, at least in architecture, are very rare. Gentle.
They're gentle.
They're not very critical, yeah. They're not, you don't really get a building that is kind of really, it's either published or not. The critique is that it doesn't get published.
Being ignored is the critique.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. If you look at that period of time, in hindsight, were there more opportunities than now? What was the difference between then and now?
So I constantly believe, an architect of my age, my position, and my colleagues, I keep saying it's our duty to send the elevator down for the next generation. So I'm also the supervisor of Schiphol, and every time I get a list of possible architects to do a design or a pitch, I always will demand that there is a wild card and there's a young office on that list, and a young office that can win, and they very often win. I do miss, so I think when I was, in those days, you had architectural cafes, you had the NIE, you had Arkham was much more involved in architecture and less in city thinking and social issues. There was no such thing as Pacas de Zwijger, which now deals with a lot of social issues. You had the Berlage Institute. So you probably had more awareness, but is it easier now or then? I'm not sure if it is easier now and then for young architects.
No, I'm not saying that out of nostalgia.
Is it
but
different?
More,
okay.
But I mean, that was clearly the age of Super Dutch.
Yeah.
So somehow, I think that was very strong. Maybe also a strong feeling of connection between the offices at the time. I don't know if that's the case, but it feels like that was like a particular generation in a particular moment in time.
Well, the Phoenix program was in full swing. There were the Netherlands was really in a kind of a second hoogbouw, so there was like a lot of building activity. Yeah. Some municipalities were very ambitious.
Yeah, so governments were stronger.
Yeah, government was stronger, and there was a lot of experimentation in woningbouw.
Yeah,
you didn't have the European aanbesteding.
No.
So that also
corporations were still very active,
and exactly the corporations were very strong, and you had consortiums. The corporations were very strong. So maybe in that sense, it was a very fertile environment.
It also was, I think, reflected in your portfolio, right? Because as an office, your first building was actually this immense parking garage in front of the Central Station, Amsterdam, Fietsflat, still there, still operating.
Yeah, but it's only meant to be there for 5 years.
No, so that's...
Only permission for 4.
That's incredible. So that's also something we have to keep in mind. Things that, well, just as your stay in Holland was also meant to be temporary, things can change over time. Intentions can change over time. How did you build up such a diverse portfolio in the office? Was that intentional, or is it also coincidental?
No, it was intentional. So we had the Fietsenflat, and we were busy with housing projects, and we had finished a housing project on the Safatistraat, and we were working on two projects in Eiberg, and one of those projects had a car elevator where you would park your car on the floor you live. And at a certain point, I started to think, well, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? Make kind of interesting luxury products? Or can I make a bigger difference? Maybe that's that social training. And therefore I actively try to get involved in psychiatric hospitals, so that I believe architecture really can influence the way you feel. It can make you feel better, it can make you feel lousy. And most people have a choice where they go, but in things like people have less choice maybe in schools and hospitals. So we went into the schools and hospitals, and we did a lot of work in psychiatric care and in even forensic psychiatric care, and looking at how you could make people feel better through environmental healing. And that led to a diversity in the portfolio. Because
that's what I find also fascinating or remarkable in your practice, that on the one hand, it has this kind of glamorous aura, and on the other hand, there is a clear social engagement, also in, for example, the public engagement that you do with residents. Yeah. How do you bring these two worlds together? And how does it work in your
this is something?
Way of
this is basically. I use Dutch words now and then because I think they're far more effective. But so I normally, a lot of the time, social buildings or architecture which was socially engaged tended to be, as you'd say in Dutch, geitenwolle sokken architecture.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't think it has to be like that. Something can actually be very beautiful, very architectural, very sublime, and be very socially engaged. So at least I tried to do. So our social housing often looks like luxury housing. I remember our first project of winning Europan, and then we got a substitute. We were meant to design 120 luxury senior houses, and then we finally got, on a completely different location, 60 social houses. And then at the same time, there was another architect, and he was doing the expensive houses. And then our project looked far more luxurious than the social housing, looked more luxurious than the expensive housing. Now, I clearly think there has to be a social engagement in architecture. Yeah. I really do believe it makes a difference.
Yeah. So, but it's also, but then it also requires craftsmanship, obviously. I mean, saying it is one thing, but...
doing it. But you also, for instance... So when I was working in the practice, I really also believed that architecture should be innovative, both in typology and in plans, in section, space, and in materialization. I really believed that you had to be innovative. And I would only see quality in architecture if there was an aspect of innovation and social engagement too. So there was at the beginning, we were just experimenting. We would experiment and we would look for new challenges to make these experiments. Both.
What kind of experiment?
Well, experiments like looking for the hospitals and how you could experiment there. And
so using it like a program that is...
Yeah. And working with the spaces and then experimenting with spaces and then how you could do things like, for instance, like when we did this project on Iberg. I said Iberg is suburbia. What are the qualities of suburbia? The qualities of suburbia that you can park your car in front of your door and you have a garden.
Yeah.
But the block didn't allow us for gardens, but we made gardens and we were able to park your car in front of your door. So these kinds of experiments. What is the quality of that environment and how can you work with that to create architecture? At the same time, we would work with kind of experimental materials. We made a gold sequence school. So
the one in the Bosch, right?
Yeah. That was a protest
against
school saying they didn't want to have a black school. I was flabbergasted that a school would actually say they didn't want to be a part of a black school. That was they didn't want certain people in their school. And this we needed to make a light. The urban planner said he wanted a jewel in a box. Yeah. And then we went to look for something jewelly, and then I saw this material, and everyone was like, what is that horrible material? And I said, what's that? Oh, that's used for the domes of mosques. I said, oh, wow, this could be interesting. It's not a bit tongue-in-cheek, you know?
Yeah. Is that being appreciated here in Holland? I mean, is that...
Sometimes. In those days, yes. You could get away with it, and people enjoy it also.
Because I feel that these times are not really... No. Irony is not greatly appreciated.
No, but irony isn't. We're also more conservative thinking, I would say.
Yeah.
For the last 10 years.
Yeah. Let's get back to that later. I recently saw a lecture that you made in the Dutch Design Week. And speaking about someone who has one story, then I saw it also when you kicked off as a supervisor in Eindhoven, talking about densification and the need for us to densify. What is that story about that our cities grow faster than the number of residents? That cities grow 10 times bigger and the number of residents grows two times bigger. Can you explain that? What happened there?
Well, I think we really are maybe we're at the edge of not climate change anymore, but climate collapse and even societal collapse, actually. These are the two huge issues that we have to deal with. The societal collapse is the inequality and the fact that people just can't afford somewhere to live. And at the same time, I believe, somebody told me there are 4,000 apartments empty in Amsterdam. And that people are living in apartments, some people are living in one person, 80 square meters in some cases, or more per person. And how much space we've created. I think the Netherlands, together with Switzerland, have the most built square meters per person in Europe, at least, if not the planet. And then you see how our cities have constantly expanded.
This is something you've researched with your office?
Yeah. Constantly expanding our city borders, occupying more and more ground in one of the most densely populated countries in Europe. I think the second after Malta. And then you feel it. And in these certain parts of the cities, the emptiness, the quietness. And I feel that actually we have to, for the environmental issues, we have to push back. We have to create more space for nature. We really need to, ideally, I believe some colleagues of mine from landscape architects from Lola, they maintain it has to be 50%. 50% for nature, 50% for man. That means reducing the landbouw. I mean, it's a wonderful word, landbouw for farming, right? It's even that mix. And then if you think about how much we occupy for the city space, infrastructure, the road system in this country. Yeah. I mean, if you take a car from here to Almere, I mean, this is like LA proportions, right? So how do we do this? So I believe we have to densify
within existing borders. No new cities.
Not building in the green anymore. And for instance, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what will happen with the Phoenixwijks. We built 1 million houses, ground-bound, or a lot of ground-bound houses. When people moved into those homes, they had young families. Yeah. That's 20 years ago, coming up to 25 years ago. Yeah. So those kids are now starting to be in their mid-20s. Yeah. So they're probably not living at home anymore. Yeah. So maybe we need to find a way to provide more so people have more choices and that we can get more of this doorstrooming. Yeah. So I feel very passionate about this.
Yes.
And the facts, they match up, to this. This is a problem that we have with the nitrogen, with the CO2. We're going to have more problems with that.
Yeah. And so basically you say a lot of these problems are related to urban planning, to spatial planning in the Netherlands, a tradition that we have actually lost, by the way.
Yeah, and I do, I have empathy with the farmers in some way.
Which way?
I feel, they're under a lot of pressure. And we knew about this for a long time and we've acted a bit slowly. But it's the same with everything. And I cannot influence that. I can eat less, but I can at least influence something about the built environment, the city environments. And I really think we also have to do our share there. And we all have to do our share everywhere.
Yes, yeah. And you're now in a position in a couple of places where you're supervising urban fabrics, parts of cities, and even a whole city. Mm-hmm. Do you also feel that this is being broadly sort of appreciated, this viewpoint? Is this landing, this idea that we should densify within constraints of cities, or is it still a wild idea that someone...
No. I think I feel very much so that it's been accepted, appreciated, and also understood outside of the branch, let's say, by normal people also start to understand, maybe this guy has a point. So in Eindhoven, I felt people really understood this, the need. Yeah. They saw it. They could see the diagrams, the charts.
Yeah, maybe for the people that didn't see that talk, they can see the snippet from it on your website.
Yes.
And I have to say, it was very convincing. And I think the combination of the graphics of the cities and then the graph of this kind of explosion of people of space versus people is just mind-blowing. Yeah. And very easily to understand also.
Exactly. And we have to help people understand this because there is a resistance to high-rise.
Yeah.
There is a resistance. And when people understand why we need to do it, they become, it's not about the high-rise, they understand the need for it.
Yes.
And then we can work with that. We can start to move on to the next step. How do you make it? How do you embed it? How do you deal with the nature inclusivity?
But maybe one step back. What is then because we were also speaking about this in the office in the past 2 days. What happened? Why did we use so much more space than 60 years ago? So we've become so sloppy. Yeah, welvaart.
Welvaart is one.
Yeah, car use has increased immensely.
Policy.
Yeah.
A monetary policy.
Yeah.
Encouraging home ownership.
Yeah.
Encouraging debt.
Yeah. The
Dutch have one of the greatest debts in the world as a society. Mortgages of 125%.
Yeah.
This is an industry also. This was a big industry.
Sure. No, but I mean but the same thing happens in Singapore, of course, and they have also mortgages and they have high rates. So it's spatial planning plus monetary planning.
Yeah, but also
policy.
Singapore is going to be in the same situation as we are. They are actually.
Yeah.
The Netherlands, very similar, and so we were pushing. So that was the policies were to push home ownership, more space. I believe also it's a business model. It's a huge business model.
Yeah,
it's a big industry.
Yeah, you mean the financing?
The whole industry, the building industry, the vastgoed industry.
So you're saying everybody's complicit because everybody can pay the bills and earn more money.
Everybody was making money. So all of us were.
Yeah.
But also, it's interesting because I had an extra for that lecture, which I didn't incorporate in the end. People felt it was too much. But what we also did, the Netherlands executes some of its plans very well. So what we did was we really followed zoning plans, the zoning. So you would have in the Netherlands, you'd have a bedrijventerrein, a kantoorstrook, a woonwijk, a leisure and sports facilities. You'd have a central functions. We separated everything out. And
Siam galore.
Yes,
Siam
exactly.
everywhere.
The perfect Siam models. And what we did was, each one of those areas was independent, almost autonomous, with its own infrastructure, its own power supplies. So people in bedrijventerreins would come in 6 o'clock in the morning and leave at 4.
Yeah.
People in kantoorstrokes or kantoor areas would come in at 9 o'clock and leave at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
People in the residential would do the same.
Yeah.
And then what's happening is this is not sustainable. You need to create sustainability. Things have to be working and used 24/7.
Yeah.
The same roads, the same energy supplies, the same street lighting.
Double use of infrastructure, double use of facilities, double use.
And even now, I'm trying to do that. Even with my work at Schiphol, I'm constantly pushing them to also. It's called inbreid.
Yeah.
Use maybe the piers are not just access to gates with small waiting areas, but piers could also be waiting areas or lounges.
Yeah.
So that we mix it up also there, so that you try to use less space and use it more efficiently.
Yeah. You're a supervisor at 4 places: Schiphol, Sloterdijk, Amstel 3, Eindhoven. Sloterdijk is maybe an interesting example because it's a node of infrastructure that was being unused.
Yeah.
When did you start there as a supervisor?
That was my first supervisory work. I started at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, or around that period. And they had just moved the bus station from the Orly-plein to the Carrasco-plein. The intention was to have a huge urban development, very tall buildings there. Then the crisis came. That plan was abandoned, and there was just one big grey concrete space called Orly-plein. I always say, actually, Sloterdijk was a mistake.
Planning mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because what's exquisite about Amsterdam are the groene scheks and the Amstelschek and that the Haarlemmermeerschek, the green that comes right into the city center. These are wonderful things. They have to be really protected.
Yes.
And putting Sloterdijk station in the middle, it's right in the middle of that schek, cuts it in half. And it wasn't always there. It was somewhere else. A little bit the station was further away, but in the urban area. Yeah. But still, then, so the idea was let's make it a mixed use area because it was just offices. It was called Teleport, and make it mixed use. And then even before the big emphasis on natuurinclusief bouw, we said our buildings had to be extra green. They had to have this nature in them. They should be more part of the schek.
How did you enforce that?
Through tenders, particularly. Yeah. In the tenders, you would get more points for the vergroening.
Yeah.
And then it was a policy, part of the requirements, because we were working with the erfpacht. So then we can actually demand certain conditions.
Yeah.
And it's more difficult if it's just a renovation.
True.
But also we said it had to be significant green.
And so you started 2007... And the crisis hit?
2008, I think.
2008, but just on the cusp of the crisis starting. Yeah. The first few years, probably nothing hit the ground, no? I mean,
Very little. I said from day one, if I want to be a supervisor, I'm not going to be a policeman. I don't want to be policing a Belkwaliteitsplan and an urban plan. So I've been very involved in the strategy of the transformation. We didn't have transformations. It was one of the first transformations.
True.
So it was the idea of how do you first of all was could we halt the verloedering? So when you get a certain amount of leegstand, emptiness, you start to get kind of the area started to become run down.
Yeah.
And I can show you examples around Europe where people start smashing up buildings when that happens.
Yeah.
So the idea was...
then also investors move away and people don't dare to invest anymore.
And I said, listen, if you want to rent your house or sell your house, you basically have to tidy up the garden, front and back, and make it look attractive. So we started taking the empty sites and we started planting flowers and seeds in them. And we had initiative to create what you call in Dutch strooigoed, this kind of confetti of programs. So little things like we made small football fields, cafes, we encouraged initiatives to get people out of the office into the public space.
Yeah.
And then it was very problematic at a point because a lot of the buildings are in the ownership of foreign investors, big foreign investment houses, and they have one empty building in Sloterdijk.
And they don't care.
They don't care. There's much bigger problem in New York or London.
Yeah.
So that was a problem. So I started doing some workshops with Arkham and Architecture Lokaal. It was called the Olifantenkooi. So getting developers together with young developers and owners. And then a transformation from a hotel came, the Holiday Inn, and then more hotels came.
And this was, just to explain, this was in like 2015 or so. So before this massive wave of tourism, so everybody was happy that things picked up again.
Yeah, and the hotels came. And then there were 7 hotels, and the hotels brought a different group of people in. Yeah. And then the
movement.
Yeah, and then life. And at the same time, we were working on changing the bestemmingsplan to create places where people are residential. Yeah. So then you're getting a different kind of habitation. Yeah. And then you realize when you go to the bakery in the morning, when it's full because the tourists will also buy it. So as an office, you say, hey, this is not so bad. Yeah. So the office market started to pick up. And then you could get this thing. Then we had these tenders, and they were extremely well received. Many developers wanted to enter them, 30 candidates to enter the first round. Wow. We said we would base the tender on quality. The land prices were low. Then,
around that time, you were also asked to become the supervisor in Amstel 3. Mm-hmm. That situation was different. It was also a kind of former office environment, but with a subway stop next to it, but then another kind of situation. What was the situation there?
It wasn't so different.
Oh.
It was, again, a very large office development park with a lot of empty buildings. And my opdrachtgever, my commissioner, said, well, listen, I think they need a supervisor. I see what you're doing in Sloterdijk. It was the same person. She said, I think we need you there too. Can you do it? It started off with one project. Yeah. I was just to supervise one project. The project called Our Domain, developed by Greystar.
OZ.
OZ. Yeah. And then it started also to change. And they said, listen, we have this one, can you have this one, can you do this? So then I started working with the urban planners. We started developing a strategy, a verdichting strategy. Yeah. And then we started in that case, which was interesting. We got the developers together. Then we selected an urban planner. So we had Zeus doing one. We had West 8 doing another. We had Khan was doing another, and then we started to.
And it was so because Khan was doing quite a big part,
piece,
so all of them did quite chunks of
big chunks, and they were buurts, neighborhoods, And then the idea was we needed to create public space. Yeah. So we would compensate. So you'd have to develop.
Because the land was all owned by the developers. Yeah. So the city didn't have any kind of public space ownership.
No land. Yeah.
Only the roads, maybe.
They had the leaseholds, the erfpacht. Yeah. So they could actually say, we have some conditions. And then we had a policy of rewards. So if you gave some land back, you could go up higher. Huh. And then we brought in, we wanted 3 scales, small, medium, and large. So
meaning which?
Heights. So that you could get the human scale in. So the idea was, how do you create public space? If you densify, you need to create quality public space. Yeah. Yeah. So we had to create quality public space, and you really need the high-rise problem is something you also know from Asia that works so well. Is sometimes you have these mix of scales.
Yes.
And that scale is the human scale. That is that street scale. Now they call it the Amsterdamse laag. Yeah. But it's not. It's about that smaller scale and then the high rise. Yeah. And you see this juxtaposition works really well. I spent a lot of time in Korea. Yeah. So I saw this developments of small and big scales and how they worked. So the idea was then we want the small scale. So you're obliged to make small scale, the human scale. And then you can make the big scale.
Yeah.
And
did these developers immediately like your idea? Were they immediately enthusiastic when they heard your...
the ideas evolved together. But we said we had to create space. I didn't exactly know at the time how I would create that space.
Mm-hmm.
I started to say, listen, we need to not always work with a stick, but a carrot. Sometimes you get more done with a carrot than you get done with a stick. And I understand their business models more than a civil servant would. So I understood the business model. I understood what motivates these people.
Yeah.
So and they appreciate the way I think. I'm trying to help them, and I realize that if we can make good public space, they have a better product,
business case.
Better thing to sell.
Yeah.
So they were, of course, sometimes you're very strict, but I understand their world.
You mentioned this quickly, but when are you strict?
When I see something that I don't think works well. Yeah.
On urban scale,
architectural scale also. And for instance, if we do a tender and they want to take something out that they agreed to do and they promised they would do, and they wouldn't do. And I, for instance, I'm very strict on no bedrooms on the ground floor on the openbare ruimte. Just that's it. And they say, yeah, but what else can I put there? I said, sorry, you can make a duplex, but you cannot put bedrooms there. Yeah. Because of this scale and what's going to happen, and then people are going to close. Or transparency is important. Yeah. And we ask them constantly to look at the context and the micro context and really read the context. I say this is not The Hague Center, it's not South Us, it's Amstel 3. Yeah. Read your context, understand the environment.
How would you describe that urban vibe there?
Cosmopolitan, very urban, metropolitan scale, Amstel 3 at least. Yeah. Very much orientated. The city at the time...
It's very dense, right?
Yeah, very dense.
There's a lot of high-rises landing there.
Yeah, the city at the time was growing at 8,000 residents a year for the last few years, 10 years before COVID. They were 100% foreign, educated people working in the businesses here. For them, they've traveled the world. They rely on the metro. They like bicycles too, actually, but they like the metro connections. The distances are nothing for them. So the Tenslotte is nothing. Amstel 3 is nothing for a Dutch person in Amsterdam. What? Live in Sloterdijk? So far away. Or live in Amstel 3? It's so far away. But for these people, this is not so far away. They like the density because it brings energy and it brings facilities. They are concerned about health, food,
and
these things.
Was this idea of drastic densification and creating this kind of metropolitan vibe initially already the idea, or did that appear over time? So when you started with this first thing, this building by OZ, that is quite a massive building, but was there already the vision then we're going to this is going to influence or inspire the rest? Or is it an idea that emerged over time?
From the beginning, scale was always important because of the business cases. They're buying buildings which are less than 30 years old. They're demolishing these buildings and they're rebuilding. Sometimes I would rather they keep the buildings and build on top of them. Yeah. So there is what you'd say in Dutch again, kapitaalvernietiging. Yeah. Loss of... So they have to be brought back. I saw the potential of the densification, that it would create more numbers and create more to solve the problem of housing shortage. Yeah. And then we made it a condition that so much of those houses would be for the people who live in Amsterdam Southeast, the young people. Yes. Yeah. So that then I also saw we were serving a society local that was already Then I also saw what we did was that the biggest problem Amsterdam Southeast faced was a reputation, but in fact it has all the facilities, all the qualities. It's a great place. There's a lot of energy, but to a lot of people who are not familiar with it, they have some kind of idea about it that's not maybe true. We've, as a society, have spent hundreds of millions, if not milliards, in transforming the Bijlmer here from the center. Now I think it's time to deal with the edges. Amstel 3 is the edge. Yeah. So we've done the center, now the edges, and we have the positioning of this part of the city is critical. And this is going towards that also.
Yeah. And then a new challenge came along. I don't know if it came along or that you... were you asked or did you apply for Eindhoven?
I was asked.
You asked. And you knew Eindhoven because of Haasje Over, obviously?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Fieke in the podcast a few months ago. So they knew your work. Why did you say yes to that question?
I feel that supervisory work has to have a certain scale to be effective. I find it a fascinating city, Eindhoven. I think there's some really beautiful parts of it, but it's fragmented. It's extremely fragmented. So I thought...
What's the beauty of it?
There are beautiful spaces that you find, that you just stumble in and out of, that you don't expect, the unexpected. There's the Medina from Neve Brown, or even Stripe S, or other parts that are really very effective, very beautiful places. But it's when you first go there as a foreigner or as an outsider, you say, "Oh, this is a horrible place. You know, what's going on here?" There's a lot of innovation. The people are very proud and motivated. The developers are very local, not so much foreign. Scale is also important. The problem at the moment is that as a supervisor, you need a certain scale to work. Otherwise, you're just another small instancy. And they had the scale to offer. I was interested in that scale.
And the scale is the inner city plus
scale.
Feyenoord, right?
Yeah.
Basically, you take over the job of both Winnie Maas and Kees Christiaans at the same time.
Yeah. And I like city making. It's something I'm really passionate about. So this was an opportunity.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. You said, well, Eindhoven has a massive scale, but not a massive urban planning department.
No.
So that can be a challenge, maybe. Or will it be part of your strategy?
It's part of my strategy to build that team, to create a culture, to create a happening, to get to motivate everybody, to bring people all together.
Yeah,
it's like I engage with the wethouders. I will engage with the burgemeester. I engage with the developers. I'm talking now and then regularly with the architects. I'm waking them up. Yeah, telling them, listen, you're not just providing buildings, you're building your city. There's some very talented architects there.
Yeah, there's the school, of course, the TU.
Yeah, but also there's a lot of good practices there. Yes. And I want to believe that together, if we can harness the economic potential, and I see it as an energy that's coming from ASML, which is phenomenal, and then together with some new players and Wake Up, you could actually create a certain kind of culture that creates something very interesting. Yeah. I believe, for instance, what happened in Groningen in the 90s came about from the big energy that was coming from the gas, together with a number of things that came together, and they were doing something really interesting. And I believe this could be possible in Eindhoven.
Fascinating. And you said in an interview, I want good buildings, but not necessarily iconic buildings. As a supervisor. So as a supervisor, what I see for Eindhoven is that a response to the previous work of Winnie Maas, or is that something because that he was on a road for very iconic kind of structures throughout the city? Winnie
did a great job in shaking up the city and shaking up everybody, and saying you could actually opening up the idea to doing to have another scale in the inner city. He really woke that up. He shook that up. He brought in the ambition. He created this ambition. My response was more from the fact that when going through the city and I saw how fragmented it was, that I feel it needed to be brought together, and that it was more about bringing the city together. It was more about that than what Winnie Maas had done. I see that, for instance, that for me, great cities are not made up of extreme pieces of architecture, but they're made up of very good buildings working together to create public space. So this is where I'm coming from. It sounds like, it's an attack on my predecessors, but it's not actually. So I believe in city making. And the other thing is, what I try to do is, it's like I always say, I'm not going to force an architect to do something that he cannot do. Get architects to do what they're good at. Get them to do better than they're good at. But don't force them to make something that they're not capable. I mean, there's nobody better than making an icon than MVRDV and Winnie Mas. Nobody can pull it off like them. They just can do it, and nobody can do it as good as them. So let's not try. Let's do something else.
Clearly your role as a supervisor is also different, I guess. What are the main? Could you maybe explain what the main tools are that you have in Eindhoven? Because that will be definitely different than Amstel 3 or Sloterdijk. The scale is different. But what are your main, let's say, policy tools or planning tools that you want to use to get your vision across?
Well, first of all, we'll always be working with ensembles, not one-to-one buildings. It's much more about building the ensembles and working on how buildings work together, creating the public space, because we're going up. It's all about densification again. So we're going up, so we need public space, and then we need nature, because otherwise, and we've seen this from so many of the Asian cities, if you need that balance between nature and densification. The tools are, of course, as the supervisor, you have a very strong mandate, and you also have to be persuasive. You have to understand, and you're working. It's improvising also, but there is a capacity problem. If people don't want to fulfill the requirements of the supervisor and what he sees, then they don't get priority to move on. Yeah. So it's a question of that. There is a hoogbouw or there is a map, a card which describes where there's potential to develop. That was done by my predecessors.
Yeah. And there's now the Knooppunt XL investment.
Yes, and that is a plan. That is a master plan. And that's actually a very good master plan. There's nothing wrong with it. Very good, actually. But I would like it to make it more Eindhoven's.
Yeah,
now,
more local?
Yeah, more local.
What is that? How could
you... Well, there is a kind of something about Eindhoven. There's a kind of imperfection. Mm-hmm. I need that imperfection. I need also, there's different scales. So street scales. There's street scales of the
villages, the former villages.
Knooppunt XL is all more or less the same scale between all the side streets and main streets, or there's very much a similar scale. So I think we could do something in the scales, and we do something in the imperfection of the blocks. Yeah. We can start to work with it. It's a very good starting point. Yeah. When I saw this, there's nothing wrong with this plan. It's a good plan to start. I'm really happy with what I can start with here. Yeah.
Exciting. So coming from the golden age of urban planning to the golden age of architecture, and I'm back in urban planning. Your work is mainly urban planning in the end. Was it?
Well, no. The practice we're really in between. Actually, we do everything, and we just finished a beautiful renovation of a kitchen on the Oranje Nassau land. So I can't say it's one or the other. We are busy outside of the Netherlands, in West Africa, doing some urban planning in Cameroon. Some resorts, and we're busy in Muscat doing urban planning. And at the same time, I'm trying to help Muscat do a bit of transformation, because what they do in these Arab cities or Middle East cities, they're constantly making new cities and leaving their old cities behind to decay. And I'm trying to get them to stop that. But that's a kind of vrijwilligers, voluntary work. I'm going there, I'm talking to the people and saying, listen, you have to, we can help you to rethink this. So I also do that. It's sort of unsolicited work. I go there, we meet the local decision makers and show them what we're doing here. Yeah.
And basically the same mission, same story. So you're also and one story.
We also did it in Amsterdam. I believe architecture is more than just in Dutch, dienstverlener. I don't believe you just wait there and wait for a commission to come. You can also generate your work when you think something needs to be done. So we made a plan for the Benelux-baan from Amsterdam from right down to the center of Amstelveen and beyond. Mm-hmm. We mapped all the buildings. We showed all the areas of potential development. We worked with the local owners to develop a plan, which we call Quality Street. The municipality is interested, but they have a capacity problem. So I think you can also, I remember also the lecture from Tado Ando. When he came, he talked about, he saw an idea for a theatre. So he made a design. He went to the Lord Mayor, and eventually he got to build that theatre.
Yeah.
Because we could actually be more...
Proactive.
Yeah, proactive. And I mean, we're defining our environment. We could actually suggest much more than just wait for a commission to come along.
On that note, I'm going to ask you one more question. This is a podcast about high-rise. We talked a lot about densification. We talked a lot about your work as a supervising densification and dense urban conditions. How do you make a real good high-rise building? That must be something you, as a supervisor, can just sum up immediately.
I can't.
No?
A good high-rise building. So, for instance, the high-rise I did, the high-rise buildings, it's very difficult to make a piece of architecture from a high-rise, actually. They're very much a single idea, right? It's one idea. You really you can make them very interesting in how they touch the ground and how you deal with the ground, or that they could be connected in some other planes and other levels. So, for instance, because you go up and down, that's a very uninteresting experience. Just go up and down and you have a great view out. If you have you certainly should have a big window. That's my problem with a lot of architecture, is that when you're in that hoogbouw or high-rise, you should have a great view out. But then I'm interested in what would happen if you could move out halfway through that building and then experience outdoor space at another level. I think they need to work better together, that they could connect sometimes at other levels. I would be interested in that. But it's just one typology. There's very little. We can make it as thin as possible. I don't think that's responsible. I think it's difficult to really make them natuurinclusive.
Yes.
Because at a certain point, nature doesn't exist up there.
So that's a challenge for you as also when you want to combine your vision of densification with indeed going up. Then
so what we did with Hash over, the idea that on the 10th floor you can walk onto the roof of the other thing and the people on the roof can walk into your building on that floor, creates a kind of engagement and connects it. Otherwise it's not such a holistic thing.
So several experiences on several heights and that also connect that to public space.
Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
Deze podcast werd mede mogelijk gemaakt door Stichting Hoogbouw en verschijnt op het platform van Architectenweb. Mijn naam is Daan Roggeveen. Ik maak deze podcast samen met Lieven Heremans en Geert Vlieger. Muziek werd gemaakt door mijn broer Job Roggeveen. Volg deze podcast via je eigen podcast-app. En je kunt ons volgen op Instagram via more.architecture. Volgend jaar gaan we verder met deze podcast en maken we opnieuw 10 interviews. In 2023, dus op luisteren.